Al Jazeera Podcasts.
Today, what's in store for the year ahead?
I suspect that 2025 will be a year of transformation.
From wars to political struggles and economic shifts, this new year is poised to reshape the world in unexpected ways. I'm Malika Bilal, and this is The Take. With a new year underway, we tapped Al Jazeera's correspondents across the world to tell us what they think 2025 will be like for the regions they cover.
For me, covering Latin America and especially Mexico in 2025, I'm going to have, I think, a real sense of deja vu. It's already started.
2024 was difficult, unexpected in terms of the number of conflicts we had to cover here on the African continent. I expect that 2025 will have conflicts that will be too large for the world to ignore.
Unfortunately, in Gaza, we welcome a new year without any change. Just things are getting worse and worse around us.
I am worried about what 2025 is going to look like because I've seen this movie before and I know how it ends.
The last voice you just heard was White House correspondent Kimberly Halkett. As she prepares for what's ahead, she's also thinking about how today, January 6th, marks an anniversary that casts a long shadow over the United States.
We remember 4 years ago when we were certifying the election results for Joe Biden, and we had an election that was being contested by Donald Trump.
That day, in 2021, led to the unprecedented storming of the U.S. Capitol, as then President Donald Trump's supporters tried to stop the certification of Joe Biden. While many of those involved are now incarcerated, Trump has said that he's likely to pardon them when he returns to office.
I mean, the irony for me is that the people that are sitting in jail are in jail, and the person that asked them to go to the Capitol is not.
In the lead up to today, the Capitol area is nothing like what we witnessed 4 years ago. But the insurrection is a reminder to Kimberly of what covering Trump might be like this year.
It ends with me being 40 pounds heavier and a lot more wrinkles on my face. I remember covering Trump the first time, and what I had last time was the advantage of not knowing what I was getting into, and now I know. And politics aside, what this man does is he doesn't sleep. He thrives in chaos, and it's like he's not human, and I am human. I need sleep. And so I don't know how I'm going to do it. I will do it, but it's hard. It's exhausting. The bottom line is that Donald Trump and his brand of politics plays really well to that kind of tribalism that we're seeing in America right now. The sort of raw lack of manner, lack of decorum, in your face type of not just politics, but the type of exchanges that you see on the street in everyday America right now. And I don't think that's going to go away under Donald Trump. I think he's just lit the match, and we're going to see a lot more of it for the next 4 years. Donald Trump is going to make the world a very disruptive environment. America is going to become increasingly isolated, and I think that we're going to see things become increasingly more combative.
Al Jazeera correspondent Dorsa Jabarri is well aware of how Trump will also impact the rest of the world. She reports from regions where Trump's foreign policy could have serious consequences, like Russia and Iran.
Iran is very much aware that this is going to be a very dangerous year for the Islamic Republic, with Trump coming into office on January 20th.
Trump's last administration had a significant impact on U.S.-Iran relations, notably withdrawing from the 2015 nuclear deal and escalating tensions through sanctions and military actions. tensions that have not eased.
Iran and the United States are going to have to decide whether they will be able to talk to reach any kind of an agreement in order to move forward and pass this deadlock that we've seen with the Biden administration. But of course, all of that will have to be with Israel in mind. Benjamin Netanyahu's objective when it comes to targeting and weakening Iran is going to continue to the point where they will either be an attack on Iran's nuclear facilities, or Iran will be forced to sit down at the negotiating table with the United States and world powers to reach an agreement about its disputed nuclear program.
But while the focus on Iran is intense, Dorsa is currently in Russia, a country she's reported from frequently during its war with Ukraine. As she looks ahead, Dorsa sees a shift. Russians have grown tired of the war, and it's the economy that's at the heart of the fatigue.
The country is in a serious economic challenge. The ruble has weakened over the past year. I was here in Moscow in August, and I usually go to the same places to buy coffee. I used to buy a cup of coffee near the office, about 350 rubles. The same coffee from the same place in December of 2024, I was paying 550 rubles. Nothing about the quality of the coffee, the size of the coffee, or the ingredients have changed since I was here last in August. But what has changed is the state of the Russian ruble. The inflation is up to nearly 10%. The country's central bank has raised interest rates to 21%, the highest in decades. And that's having an effect on inflation and the price of goods. What I'm noticing the most is the prices of ordinary daily things in the supermarket. For example, potatoes, price of which have gone up 88% over the past year. Butter increased 35% in 2024. Now, these are staples in the Russian cooking and households. So really, ordinary Russians are now seriously feeling the pinch, the economic pinch, as a result of the war in Ukraine. But at the same time, this has not changed Vladimir Putin's popularity or standing within the general population. For now, he is still very much in command and control, and people still trust him. But it's going to be a challenge for the Kremlin to maintain this country's economic standing to prevent the situation from getting much worse.
While the economic situation in Russia is dire, the future of the war in Ukraine remains uncertain. And Dorsa says Trump will have a big role to play.
U.S. President Donald Trump has said that he's going to end the war in Ukraine within the first day that he's in office.
Because I'll meet with Putin, I'll meet with Zelensky. They both have weaknesses and they both have strengths. And within 24 hours, that war will be settled. It'll be over.
Many here are skeptical that that's actually going to happen because the Kremlin hasn't been in contact with Trump directly since he was elected in November, and they haven't seen a viable proposal by the U.S. administration. Vladimir Putin has said he's open to talking to Donald Trump. The two men have a long history together. They are not adversaries, but the language that has come out of the Kremlin since Donald Trump was reelected has been slightly less adversarial than we have heard with the Biden administration. What is clear is that at least Trump has the desire to end this conflict and also to reduce or stop the U.S. aid that is going into Ukraine. And that could possibly have a ripple effect on ending this conflict sooner rather than later.
Moving to Latin America, there are no surprises about what Al Jazeera correspondent John Holman thinks he'll be covering in 2025.
In Mexico in 2025, especially in the first part of the year, it's really going to be about one country and one man, and that's incoming President Donald Trump. Is he going to come good on his threat of 25% tariffs of all goods coming from Mexico into the United States? And how's the country going to respond to that? We've got a new president here too, Claudia Sheinbaum. It's going to be a real challenge for her and the way she deals with President Trump, especially with the things that he's demanding of Mexico. He's saying that the country has to stop migrants getting through the country and coming from Mexico to the United States border. He's also saying that it has to stop the flow of fentanyl, that deadly opioid that's been causing a public health crisis for a number of years in the United States. In terms of fentanyl, that really leads us on to another thing that I'm going to be paying close attention to, and that's the state of Sinaloa in the west of the country and the Sinaloa cartel that bears the same name. It's one of the two most important in Mexico, and it's been in a civil war that shows no sign of letting up. Hundreds of people have been killed. It's really devastated the economy, and it's really worried the government here in Mexico as to what that might mean.
But there's one more story that he'll be following closely in the region.
There's one other country, arguably the biggest mess, and that's Haiti. This is a country in which the capital is mostly under the control of gangs, in which there's widespread hunger, in parts even famine, in a country in which the recruitment of gangs, according to UNICEF, over a year has gone up by 70% in terms of recruiting children. So that's a huge problem that we're going to have to keep looking at, and the world should keep watching as 2025 goes on.
After the break, we take you to Africa, Gaza, and other parts of Asia, where the stories unfolding will define 2025.
There is an overarching issue that is affecting all of us here on the African continent. It's climate change and the intensity in which it is acting and how we're feeling it.
For Al Jazeera's West Africa correspondent, Nicolas Haque, environmental stories are going to be a big part of his focus in 2025.
Here in Senegal, we've seen unprecedented floods. We've seen unprecedented droughts in the Horn of Africa. We've seen people on the move, cyclones hitting the islands of Mayotte, the French islands of Mayotte, where we've seen protests there, really testing the institutions and the power at play. So much of the conflicts that we're seeing in the Sahel region is not about faith or about countries or about rebel groups. It's about water or access to water. So much of the motivations for people to leave this continent for a better life is being pushed or driven by the fact that there's the climate that's driving them away, that they can't grow food or crop on their land. And we're going to see an increase in amount of people moving, not necessarily across continents, but within the continent, trying to find safer places to live in. And cities like this one, Dakar, or other big capitals are already receiving every day hundreds of people, new families that are coming here for refuge, seeking a better life away from this harsh and unforgiving climate.
Nick says that while conflict and war were major stories in Africa last year, much of the world looked elsewhere. The wars in the Middle East and Ukraine dominated global headlines, overshadowing the growing violence in places like Sudan.
We're talking about famine being used as a weapon of war. Millions of people are on the road, and there is a corridor of conflict stretching over 4,000 kilometers from East to West Africa, from the Sahel to the Horn of Somalia. And we're seeing the existing conflicts being exacerbated even more, and we're seeing new conflicts.
Existing conflicts being exacerbated is exactly what Tony Cheng, Al Jazeera's correspondent in Thailand, is worried about as well, like what's happening across the border in Myanmar.
Once again, Myanmar is likely to be one of the top stories of 2025, even though it doesn't get a lot of coverage from the global media. We've seen huge changes over the last 12 months, and that's likely to continue over the next year. We've seen the armed resistance, armed only with automatic rifles and a certain amount of ingenuity, pushing back the military from all of Myanmar's borders, with India, with China, with Thailand. But they're facing an army that is fully equipped with fighters, bombers, artillery, armed vehicles, and it is a very bitter fight in which civilians are increasingly caught in the middle. We're seeing huge shortages of food supplies, medical supplies, life is getting very tough for millions inside Myanmar. And although the government is facing very stiff opposition and being pushed back, it's not going to go without a very big fight. One big change we're likely to see, though, is elections. Now, that sounds ridiculous in a country where the government controls less than 50% of the territory, but they're being pushed behind the scenes by the Chinese. They want to see the military-backed regime, which has a certain degree of legitimacy, and elections, however flawed, might give them that.
Speaking of China, it's also sharing some of the same concerns we've been hearing about in other parts of the world. Donald Trump's return to the White House.
One of the things he is likely to do is impose more tariffs on China. Whether that breaks out into a full trade war or not is unclear at this stage, but he leads an administration which is unlikely to look favorably on China, and that'll have impacts elsewhere. I think many countries in the region concerned that they will get caught up in a trade war. Of course, China's massive economy, its influence now extends well beyond its own borders.
As the impact of a potential trade war with China looms, another unexpected development is also shaking up the region: South Korea's political turmoil.
Well, the attempt to impose martial law in South Korea by President Yoon, I think, took many people in Asia by surprise. It's a country that's often held up as an example, as one which had a very turbulent political history, but had reformed itself and had a very solid and strong political system, a strong democracy, and a very strong and thriving economy. South Korea remains very influential in the region, and I think people will be looking to see a return to strong leadership and stable leadership there.
While change could be on the way in many parts of the world, Al Jazeera's digital correspondent, Maram Humaid, tells us there's one place where little change is expected: Gaza.
Talking about a new year is something strange and meaningless, actually, for anyone lives in Gaza these days. As the world knows, Gaza is entering a second year of the ongoing war, of the ongoing genocide. Every day, it gets harsher and harsher.
If you're watching this podcast on YouTube, you'll notice that Maram is the only correspondent who didn't send a video. That's because of the logistical and technological challenges she faces in Gaza due to Israeli bombardment, making it nearly impossible. With no electricity, Maram recorded her voice note in the dark.
There is no space to welcome the new year. There is no space for the warm wishes and for the hopes for a new beginnings. People in Gaza are just trapped in misery, hopeless, and trapped in suffering and starvation and displacement. And only wish for anyone in Gaza is just to cease the fire, just to let this war stop as soon as possible.
Like many Palestinians in Gaza, Maram will be trying to piece her life back together in 2025, all while the genocide continues.
I'll be starting from scratch, searching for everything, looking for a house, looking for a school for my daughter, talking to the displaced population in Gaza, reporting more sad stories on people's dire conditions, and searching for food and running and looking for the electricity and internet everywhere. I can't say I'm optimistic or pessimistic. I'm just someone who lost all the feelings of how a normal human being feel. I'm just waiting for something to happen, something to stop this.
And that's The Take. We really want to hear your thoughts on today's episode. What do you think will be the biggest story of 2025? Let us know in the comments below. We'll be reading through. Until then, see you tomorrow.